The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
A very warm welcome to this government community webinar. We are still waiting for some people to join, so please bear with us for a couple of minutes and we will be right back. Thank you. Hello and good afternoon to those of you joining from Europe, from Africa and the Middle East, and a very good morning to participants located in the Caribbean and North America. Once again, welcome to this year's Government Community Webinar. My name is Jordi Bardolet, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Just on Tuesday, we hosted a similar webinar with governments primarily from the Asia Pacific region. But today, I'm very pleased to address such a large audience in this second government community webinar of the year with participants from some 55 countries. So for those of you who don't know me, I am responsible on behalf of IATA and Thematic for developing and maintaining partnerships with government agencies all over the world. The goal of this webinar today is to remind you of the very important role you play in the process of distributing timely regulatory changes to the aviation industry and beyond. Now, throughout today's session, we will emphasize on the importance of having global travel regulations updated in a timely manner and available to airlines and to the general public. We recognize that nowadays there is, let's say, webinar fatigue, and so we value and appreciate you taking the time to join in this webinar. So once again, thank you very much. And let's move to the next slide, please. So time for a couple of guidelines now. To ensure a good call quality, you will all be muted. But we would certainly like to hear from you. So if you have questions, please use the question panel available to you in this GoToWebinar tool. With me today, I have Maren and Samuel, who will capture all your questions. And together with the rest of panelists, we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of this webinar. Now, feel free to send your questions even during the presentations, but please, and this is important, indicate the name of the panelist you are addressing your question to. And finally, this session will be recorded and will be sent to all of you in the coming days. Now, the agenda. This webinar will cover the following. We'll start with Mahir Sahin, who is the Assistant Director of Thematic. He will officially welcome you all and will also give a very brief introduction about IATA. I will then provide an overview of Thematic and will provide also some context before I touch on the benefits of working together with the institutions that you all represent. We will also hear from the Swedish border policing section and how they handle communication concerning incoming travel regulations that affect their borders. And we've got Beth Gearing from United Airlines. She will talk about the challenges airlines are currently facing. And as always, the last part of this session will be dedicated to questions and answers. So now, Mahir, please, over to you.
Thank you, Jody. Hello and welcome, everyone. It's great to get together once again with our partners. So thank you very much for taking the time and joining this webinar. It's been a tough 2 years for the entire industry, but finally we are seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, and we hope that things will get better soon. As you can imagine, Thematic plays a critical role in terms of helping the entire travel industry get the right information about travel regulations on time. And of course, this role has been more important than ever during the pandemic. And as the industry relied on us as Thematic, we have relied heavily on our partners and governments. Therefore, I would like to extend a big thank you for your contribution, for your collaboration and your partnership. Your support is invaluable to us to help the industry. So once again, a big thank you to all of you. If we can move on to the next slide. So let's quickly talk about IATA and its position in the industry. As you may know already, IATA is a trade association for the world's airlines, consisting some 219 members, covering and representing 83% of global air traffic. And with over 400 partners, what IATA does is to help airlines by setting standards, simplifying processes, increasing passenger convenience, and through that, IATA supports the airline industry to operate safely, securely, efficiently, and economically as well under the clearly defined rules. And on top of that, as we call one of our core activities, IATA helps improve understanding of the air transport industry among decision makers and increase awareness of the benefits of the aviation and what it brings to the national and global economies. However, it is very important to keep in mind that IATA is a non-profit organization. So whatever commercial activity IATA is going through, and any commercial activity done by IATA, is only to help sustain IATA's ability to help the airline industry. So essentially that all of the commercial activities that we do is to just keep IATA alive. If we can move on to the next slide. So this position of IATA puts IATA in a very critical role, and that is to both represent and lead and serve the airline industry at the same time. And we are working very hard to carry out this mission. As our Director General Willie Walsh said, if we can move on to the next slide, we'll get through the COVID-19 crisis. And what I would like to do is to emphasize the importance of your contribution to get through the crisis. And through that, I would like to once again thank you for your continued support. Jordi, back to you.
Great, Mahir. Thank you very much for that introduction. So some of you work closely with the Thematic team already, and I know that you understand the relevance of your role when it comes to sharing regulatory travel updates. So if you are one of our existing sources, I hope this webinar will help you just refresh your knowledge about Thematic. That said, I'm sure that you will learn something new as well. For those of you who know very little about Thematic or don't know anything at all, we trust this webinar will provide you with enough information for you to join our government community and network. That way, you can also contribute to the end goal of this webinar, which is no other than, next slide, please, Maren. And I'll read this out loud for you, is to reinforce the value of having updated global travel regulations timely available to all stakeholders. And I underline the word timely, as it is critical that we obtain proactive updates from your respective departments before travel regulations come into effect. So, for those of you who are new to this, let me very briefly introduce you to the thematic team. Now, we are based in Amsterdam, and we recently expanded and have now presence in Singapore, covering therefore all time zones. Recognizing that the government officials in many countries don't speak fluent English, or English is not their mother tongue, we've assembled a team that speaks 14 languages. And we spend most of our time encouraging you, governments, to keep us informed about the latest changes concerning travel regulations. And this webinar is just another example of a series of initiatives we're taking to continue to engage with relevant government agencies, such as the ones that you all represent. And we do this, and this is important, to enable hundreds of airlines and millions of passengers actually to have access to the most up-to-date travel requirements, and therefore avoiding unnecessary travel disruptions. Now, diversity is one of IATA's brand values, and so engaging with government representatives from so many different cultural backgrounds and from over 220 countries and territories is something that we highly value and that we enjoy as well. Now, countries are opening up, as we all know. In fact, according to our own records, about 20 countries have removed all COVID-19 related restrictions so far. However, as we also know, challenges do remain. Some of these challenges are captured on this slide. And as a result of these challenges, and simply put, airlines keep struggling to keep up. There is good news though. As I always say, the institutions that you all represent are one of the solutions to these challenges. And I will talk about the benefits of working together in a minute and how we can better support each other. But first, let me set the scene. Why do passengers check in the first place? Well, as most of you know, airlines are responsible for ensuring that each passenger they transport has sufficient travel documents for their entire journey. This means that airlines have no choice but to comply with entry regulations imposed by your respective governments. And failing to comply with these requirements has damaging consequences, not just for them, for airlines, I mean, it also impacts handling agents, it impacts airports, immigration authorities, of course, at destination, and of course, it impacts millions of travelers. And so I don't know if any of you have ever experienced the stress of flying to a destination to be denied entry or even being deported back. Maybe not you, perhaps you know of a friend or a relative. Well, sadly, thousands of travelers go through that ordeal daily. And according to an IATA report that is dated only from 3 years ago, so before COVID times, an average of 60,000 travelers are turned back at destination by immigration authorities each year. The reasons vary, of course, but this is mainly due to outdated information available to passengers or the airline they flew with prior to their trip. The most common are listed there in 4 bullets: the lack of a valid document, or maybe it's a valid document, but the validity of the document is not enough. Passengers arriving with a visa, without a visa, or with the wrong visa. Passengers not having a return onward ticket, and in the last 2 years, more specifically, for not being compliant with the COVID-19 requirements. Now, another all too common scenario is when passengers who are properly documented are denied boarding at the point of origin simply because IATA wasn't informed of, say, a bilateral agreement signed between two countries allowing their own nationals to enter each other's country without a visa. The impact of all of this is, as we all know, huge. And so for those of you who don't know and wonder, what if there was a system that could prevent inadmissible passengers from being transported? Or in other words, what if there was a tool that would allow airlines to board only those passengers who are properly documented? Well, the answer is the tool exists. It's called Thematic, and it has been supporting aviation, supporting governments and travelers for over half a century. So yes, 50 years. So let me dig into this a little bit further. What is Thematic? Essentially, Thematic is a tool maintained and managed by IATA. This tool contains regulations on passport, visa, health requirements, and that is in addition to information on customs. It is used during reservation and check-in by the entire airline industry around the world to determine travel border control regulations. It features travel regulations for all type of passengers, and that includes diplomats, merchant seamen, airline crew, minors, stateless and refugees, military personnel, etc. It covers requirements and restrictions for every nationality and going to every destination via every transit point. So as you can imagine, it's the amount of data that goes into this system is huge. In addition to that, it also covers special entry requirements for those attending conferences, summits, or international sport events. So the content that is available in Thematic covers the following. Immigration requirements, such as what you see on your slide, travel documents accepted by each country, and that is any document that is accepted in lieu of a passport. The validity of those documents, and also who is exempt from needing a visa, or if passengers are eligible to obtain one upon arrival. As I mentioned, Thematic also includes health requirements, such as yellow fever requirements, and more specific to COVID-19, information such as test results and the language in which those results should be issued, the type of name of the test, the format, the validity of the test results, quarantine and self-isolation measures, special regulations to passengers arriving from certain countries, health declaration forms, passenger locator forms, insurance, links to register prior to arrival to a country, and finally, recovery certificates. And as you see there, yes, country accessibility is also includes information on accessibility of any given country by air, such as flight suspensions, airport or airspace closure, and borders closure. So our kind request is that regardless of the government agency each one of you represents, if you handle any of this information, please send it to us. And now let me show you some figures. So on this slide, I've highlighted the key facts that reflect the scale of what we are accomplishing among all of us. 300 airlines worldwide have access to Thematic, and so do about 130,000 travel agencies globally. Around 700 million international passengers were checked through different Thematic solutions in 2019 alone. So again, that was before the COVID times. And this information is handled and managed by a team of multilingual immigration experts who provide day-to-day operational support, customer service, and advice to airlines on complex immigration rules. And it goes without saying that all of this would not be possible if it wasn't for the exceptional support provided by our 2,000 sources who currently, and because of COVID-19, submit an average of 150 daily updates. So if you're one of them, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you. Thank you for your support and contribution. It is really, really important and appreciated, of course. If on the contrary, you are not one of them, if you're not one of our sources yet, I truly hope that by the end of this webinar, you will become one. Now, once we obtain the necessary information on travel requirements, we provide it to airlines and the general public through different solutions. It would take far too long to walk you through all of them. But what's important to mention is that the IATA Travel Center, for instance, is accessed monthly by millions of passengers who are looking for the most up-to-date information. Next one, yeah, and this is just a screenshot of the map and the COVID-19 section, where countries are colored depending on their level of restrictions. So to the left, you can see two examples. When selecting, for instance, Sweden, it displays that the country recently lifted all COVID-19 related travel regulations as of the 1st of April, actually. And when clicking on Canada, it shows all the current regulations and restrictions that apply as of April the 5th in their case. Now, while many of you realize that by partnering with us, your country also benefits, others are less aware, and so this brings me to the next slide. And is that the reality is that without the active support of governments, it is incredibly challenging for airlines and passengers to comply with your own entry regulations. So again, regardless of which government body you work for, if you or your department handle any information related to entry regulations, please send it to us. Together, we can help reduce the number of improperly documented passengers arriving to your borders. And so IATA and all its member airlines are more than ready to support governments. What's more, partnering with Thematic results in what we believe is a clear win-win situation. It benefits passengers, obviously. It benefits airlines, travel agencies, airport, and most importantly for this audience, it benefits you. Because Thematic is ultimately presented to your government as a reinforcement to improving immigration control, a tool to disseminate your country's new border control requirements in real time and at no cost for you. And let's not forget that Thematic is also a platform that helps promote your country, which, by the way, brings significant economic and cultural benefit. And it is actually very simple. All you have to do is communicate changes to us. And as we always say, let us do the rest. This is how many of you already communicate changes to us. And I would like to kindly invite those of you who still don't to do the same. Make use of this powerful platform to spread travel requirements affecting your country, and we push that information out to the world. And we're talking about a global audience that essentially includes nearly all international airlines and everyone who travels internationally. How can you help? How can you contribute? Well, it couldn't be any easier, really. All you need to do is send your proactive updates to teamediting@iata.org. And we also ask you to add the same email address to your distribution list when you send resolutions, circulars, or documents issued by your own governments. Now, in addition to this simple communication channel, and based on feedback received from some of you, we are now considering creating an app that you could use to submit changes instead of emailing them to us. So at this point, we would like to assess whether there is enough interest among governments before we start developing this app. The idea is to enable you to be more agile in providing updates and have more control over the data that goes into Thematic. What you see here is just a mock-up, of course, but the idea is to keep it very simple. You would log in into the app, you would choose the country you are submitting changes for, pick the relevant section, and then would be presenting with basically two options, as you see on this slide. Option one, if the update is something short, easy, and simple, you just type it in. Option two, if you don't want to type anything in particular, you can just upload a document. Step two shows the thematic editing team performing the actual update into the system, and then step three, which we think would be an optional step, is for the editing team to confirm back to you that the thematic database has been updated accordingly. Now, as I said, at this point, we would like to know if this is something that you are likely to use. So we've got the first poll of today, and would like to ask you, Myron, if you can just run indeed, do you think that such an application would help you? I would like to you to just vote on one of those three options. Yes, you think that would certainly help you. If you think no, then just vote for no. And if you are unsure at this stage, just vote unsure. And I'm going to give you a couple of seconds, and I'll see. I'm going to check now. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And this brings me to the final slide. If you can move to the next, if you need more information, you can either contact us at sourcing@iata.org, or you can visit our website as indicated here, where you can find plenty information and even 3 very short videos that explains the message that I just tried to convey during this presentation. If you have, by the way, any feedback that you think might improve what we're doing and how we're doing it, please feel free to let us know. And now I think it's time for one of our panelists. We've got Johanna Lindblad and Christopher Tunander from the Swedish Border Police, who will give a short presentation from a government perspective. Johanna, Christopher, over to you.
Thank you very much, Georgie, and thank you to Thematic for inviting us today. We are going to give you a brief presentation on how we work with Thematic and information on entry regulations from a government authority perspective. And I think we can move on to the next slide. And the next again. Thank you. So my name is Johanna Lindblad. I'm a legal officer with the Swedish Border Police, and I have my colleague with me.
Christopher Tunander, Coordinator, Border Management.
And maybe a bit obvious, but as we are the Swedish Border Policing section, we are part of the Swedish Police Authority, which means we are not part of the government offices, but we are an independent government agency. And part of what we do, well, we have the national responsibility for border management and return operations in general. And one part of that responsibility is that we update information on applicable and current regulations, of course, through our own channels, such as the Police Authority's external website, Q&As, and we also provide it to external partners such as Thematic. Now, obviously, it's also important for us to provide updated and current information internally within the organisation. And in this regard, we work a lot to make sure that the information that we provide internally and externally correspond, so that all parties have the same information to ensure compliance based on the same information. Perhaps also like to add that the information that we provide, being a government agency, is all open information. The legislation, it's not, there is no classified information in the information that we provide to Thematic, but rather making sure that the information is available in that system.
Next slide, please. We have a long-term continuous cooperation since several years with Thematic connected to changes in entry restrictions. We also provide information regarding entry regulation in a simple format and have an informal cooperation, sending an email to Thematic with information regarding changes. Also, we have a dialogue when application of regulation is unclear, and then Thematic is then responsible for analyzing and putting the information into their system. Next slide, please. The entry restrictions due to COVID-19 were in force during 2 years in Sweden. The entry restriction, as you already mentioned, has been lifted entirely on the 1st of April this year. There were frequent and short notice changes in the restrictions, and we have a total of 169 updates of the entry restrictions and the regulation connected to the entry restrictions made in Sweden. We have a good and swift communication with the Thematic team. The notifications from the border police, we are sending them as soon as possible after the regulation changes has been decided to Thematic. And the responses to the questions verifying the information. When Thematic asks us if something is in the information is unclear, they then contact us, and they also contact us when they become aware of an upcoming change which they want to be double checked. Next slide, please.
So looking at the benefits of the cooperation for us from a government perspective, a general benefit, of course, is that the information provided by Thematic provides compliance with the regulations, which from a government perspective is an important element. It does, of course, help that we are through Thematic able to reach many airlines in one channel. And we are able to ensure correct travel documentation for travellers wishing to enter Sweden. One consequence of this being able to spread information this way through one system is that we find that, pardon me, we do get less individual questions directed to us from airlines or from people wishing to travel to Sweden, because they are able to find it easily available somewhere else, which is an advantage for us. Perhaps also like to say that, well, which in general means that it facilitates border control for us, because the people who come to the border have the right documentation and are entitled to enter Sweden. It's in everybody's interest. It's in nobody's interest for a traveller to buy a plane ticket and end up being denied entry, where this could have been avoided with updated available information. Looking at some of the challenges, well, being not a part of the government offices but a government agency, we are of course ourselves also in our daily work relying on information on updates on upcoming regulation changes being provided to us. Before we get that, we can't provide it to anybody else. It is, of course, also always a challenge. The legal situation can at times be quite complex and difficult to explain in a simple manner. And there can be challenges in discretionary clauses and some legal interpretations, but in general we do find that the level of information provided by Thematic is adequate and helpful at a good level. And it is a cooperation that we intend to keep up and really appreciate. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both, much appreciated. That was a very clear and well-structured presentation, so thank you very much. And so now it's the turn for Beth Goering from United Airlines, who will provide a more specific view, stating the challenges airlines are facing, especially during these COVID times. Beth, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jordi. Hello all, it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to share the carrier's perspective with you. Maren, next please. Next. So taking a look, the COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically changed the aviation business globally. It's almost 2 years since COVID virus was first detected, and our understanding of the virus and our ability to respond to it have evolved considerably. The industry and the public were hit hard, and at this point, there isn't a single person who hasn't been touched in some way by the financial or emotional impacts of this pandemic. At the start of 2020, United and United Express were operating about 4,900 flights a day to 362 airports across 6 continents. And with our membership in the Star Alliance, we support travel to 195 countries. Understanding the documentation requirements for travel would be impossible without the support of Thematic. The government's response, usually led by public health officials, with entry requirements being enforced by the border control, immigration, or customs authorities, this was really difficult for us. And on the onset of the pandemic, the airline challenges were compounded by the inconsistent policies to closing borders, quarantine and testing requirements that were being imposed by governments. The approaches changed weekly, sometimes daily, and were not coordinated with each other, resulting in incredibly complex maze of restrictions for our company and our customers to navigate. The lack of standards that we saw in the requirements and the application of policies at the borders made it extremely difficult for industry to comply. What this experience has truly illustrated was a need for governments to standardize their approach and not pursue legal penalties against airlines for alleged non-compliance, especially with the numerous changes that we were receiving. No coordination between countries' health requirements or consistencies in the measures being applied. So many states mandated customers provide test or vaccination documentation, and our airport staff were required to review testing documentation in the same manner that we look to confirm passports and other documents such as visas for travel. Where these vary as a function of the origin country, the destination country or transit point, the vaccination status, and it's common that there's multiple combinations of requirements that apply to the different individual passengers on the same flight, which made additional checks after the initial check-in almost impossible for us to comply with. I find math in general very challenging, but to add on time zones with arrival and departure variances, it's next to impossible for us to achieve. During this time, Thematic made COVID requirements to the support to help illustrate, to support our airport teams in their decision-making processes, which again further illustrated the role that the Thematic team plays in supporting the industry and traveler compliance. The evolving spread and appearance of variants led to consistent and constant review and change. The lack of information or continuous change in information degraded consumer confidence and negatively impacted operations. To give you an example, United canceled multiple flights due to changing restrictions, where we would receive communication in the morning that a testing timeframe had changed, making it next to impossible for our customer outreach to ensure compliance. Although these were government changes, the carrier was the one that was caught in the middle to enforce. Thematic uses the most comprehensive database of customs, visa, and health data to make customer document check at the airport more efficient. I can honestly say our operations are dependent on the content that Thematic provides, which further illustrates our dependency on the role that each one of you play in ensuring that that information provided to them is both accurate and timely. Strengthening these partnerships protects not only your borders, but also supports our ability to comply. And as it was mentioned earlier from Jordy, airlines must determine whether passengers and crew comply with the travel measures that apply to their itinerary. COVID stripped the industry of our ability to use automation. Even though our operations decreased, our transaction time for traveler check-in increased as customers were forced to the airport to present their non-standard documents for manual review. Several customers would show up at our counters only to be denied transport due to wrong tests or having travel documents that were conflicting with the new regulation that was posted. Information that was prevalent in both embassy and consulate websites or on official websites often contained guidance that was different from what was being provided by the border authorities. This again further illustrates why it's really important that we receive accurate information and that we're providing that information to our customers so that they can read and understand the regulations and guidelines before they attempt to fly. Next, Maren. Customers struggle with navigating the travel complexities in this COVID era. And again, it's because the rules change so frequently and we rely on Thematic to provide accurate travel rules. Our tools are based off the information that is provided. And this little snapshot shows an illustration of where we are using their products and tools to help guide our customers in providing this information. Maren, next. So our Travel Ready Center supports us in this process, and we use the content and information from Thematic for these tools. To become travel ready, we need you. It's meetings such as these that show this is so important to help reinforce having updated global travel regulations readily available to all stakeholders. We cannot support compliance for our shared travelers without your support. From an industry perspective, we meet with our peers along with the Thematic team to share best practices while working together to prioritize the solutions that should be developed in the short, medium, and long term for the products. Learning from the response of this pandemic, there is room for intense coordination between control authorities and carriers in helping shape the policies for travel. As we look forward to the return of air travel, we continue to advocate that your teams support the restart and overall recovery efforts by ensuring the channels of communication remain open. Next. This is an overview of really how our products use the information that your teams provide to Thematic and again are then disseminated to the industry for use. Simple overview, the customers access the United Travel Ready Center through all of our United products. Based on their itinerary, they are told what is required for travel based on the information that is contained in Thematic. From that information, we're then able to help guide them through ensuring they would be travel ready. The true intent of our products is to ensure that our customers don't come to the airport if they're not able to travel. And again, what this pandemic and the constant changes illustrated for United is that's really difficult to do if the guidance that's contained is not accurate or not timely. Again, changes were made in the morning that negatively impacted our customers. We had one example where customers were required to have a test taken 72 hours prior to departure. We communicated that information after travelers had purchased tickets. They've checked in for travel 24 hours in advance, only to then receive information that morning that the test time frame was changed to 48 hours. Next to impossible for us to, again, communicate and account for, and we were winding up having to cancel flights and travelers being disserviced. Next, Maren. The Travel Ready Center is, again, intended to take that information, help guide our customers, work as that electronic concierge to provide the information, and then also review their travel documents. Because the travel documents are not standard, we really struggled with being able to communicate correctly to travelers the difference between a molecular test or an antigen test, antibody tests, different vaccinations. We're not scientists, but really the industry has had to work together with Thematic and with our local leadership in various countries to help guide us to ensure traveler compliance. Again, our intent is to ensure compliance, but this again illustrates why it's so critical that we have those partnerships with the governments through Thematic to ensure that industry has the most recent information. Increasing these efficiencies really reduces the barriers to travel. The next slide, I believe I'm asking for questions.
Yes, thank you, Beth. That was a very clear message, came across, I think, rather clear. And for the record, this is not just a challenge that United Airlines is facing. This is a challenge that the entire industry is having to deal with. So before we move to questions for any of the panelists, I forgot actually to reveal the result of the first poll when we were asking whether the app that we are thinking of designing for you is something that you would find useful. And 61% of you voted yes, and about 34% said they were unsure. Only 6% voted no. So we have now time for a second poll before we move on to Q&As. And the poll is, as you see on your screen, how important do you think it is to partner with Thematic and communicate updates to us based on what you've heard and seen today? Again, the choice, you have three choices. You think that it's really critical. You think that may not be critical but important. And again, you may think that it's not important at all. So I'll give you about 15 to 20 seconds to decide what do you think, and then we'll close the poll and we'll move to the Q&A session. Okay, just a couple of more seconds. And panelists may vote, by the way, forgot to mention that. Okay, also very clear, 53% of you think this is critical. I'm very happy to hear that. And 48% of you think it is important. Not a single person voted not important. So this is indeed good news. So as I said, we've got a couple, 5 to 7 minutes left for questions. And so I'd like to ask Maren and Samuel if you could read out loud any of the questions that have been posted, Maren, and whether they've been addressed to me, to Beth, or to our colleagues from the Swedish border police.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah, we get a couple of questions actually, and I'm trying to sort them. Please keep posting your questions and we will follow up if we can't answer them. But I think the first question is pretty interesting, Jody. I think that's to you. We often have documents that are issued in local language. Are we able to send you these even though they may not be in English?
Yes, and thank you for that question. At the beginning of my presentation, I did mention that we have a team that, among all of us, including myself, we speak about 14 languages. And although English would always be the preferred option, we accept updates or documents that are issued in other languages. So I hope that answers the question. English is the preference. And by the way, we are also organizing a webinar addressed to all Spanish-speaking countries that will take place in mid-May. And so, because we know that especially in the Central and South America, they prefer to communicate changes in Spanish. And so just for them, we'll organize a webinar, I believe it's on the 12th of May. I hope that answers the question. Next one, please.
I think that was really clear. We've got one question for Beth from United. How does United deal with passengers who challenge information published in Thematic and they listed, for example, at check-in?
Thanks for that, Maren. Actually, that does happen quite frequently, and we saw that throughout this pandemic. Our single source of information is Thematic. We do not look at embassy guidance. We do not look at information that is found on the web, which is why it has been difficult when the guidance does not line up. We view that the guidance in Thematic is the industry standard, and therefore, if a customer does not meet the travel documents as outlined in Thematic, they're denied boarding. Because again, we view Thematic as that source of primary information. So again, another illustration of why the information for Thematic is so important to be accurate.
Thank you, Beth. I think that explained it very well. I've got one for the Swedish authorities, Christopher and Johanna. There's one question to you. Do you have to wait for travel regulations to be made legal before sending them to Thematic? I think you answered it a little bit during your presentation, but feel free to answer that one.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, we have to wait before they get legal, but they have to be decided first by the government before we can communicate it, because there can be changes until they are decided by the government. And as fast as they are decided by the government, we can send the information, which we have been doing during the COVID-19 pandemic. But they have to be decided by the government. So even if we have seen a proposal of how they will look, we need the confirmation that they are decided by the government before we can communicate it.
But we aim at having it communicated before they enter into force, but sometimes there isn't enough time, but that's the aim, to do that.
Thank you very much, Christopher and Johanna. I think another question, which is kind of following up to Jordi. When you receive updates to be made from the sources, how are you sure this information is 100% accurate?
Good question, and the answer is actually quite straightforward. If the information comes from our designated source, we don't question it. It comes from our source, it is reliable, and therefore it's okay to go as far as we are concerned. It is true, however, that sometimes the information is that we receive is incomplete or it's unclear, and then our editing team goes back to the source and asks the necessary questions before making the final decision on to publish the information, just to ensure that the data provided to airlines is 100% accurate and precise.
Thanks, Jordi. And I think we've got time for one more question. And that's a very
Yes,
good
please.
one. The audience was asking, is our department allowed to access Thematic?
Yes, we grant access to Thematic to all our sources. No, that's not true. We grant free access to Thematic to our active sources, those who are proactive and sending updates whenever there is a change. And for that, without a shadow of a doubt, we grant them access just as a thank you for their contribution. So yeah, the answer is yes. And Mara and I, yeah, I don't know if we'll have more questions, but we need to start wrapping this up. We've got 3 minutes left, and I have actually a last poll. If you can just move to the next slide, indeed. So we hope that this webinar was informative and useful. But before we log off, please take a second to answer this last poll. Because we believe that during the registration process, you must have had some expectations, and so it'll be good to know for us if this webinar met your expectations. Here we are giving you 2 extra choices, 5 in total, because that will help us, when organizing the next webinar. So was it much more than expected? It was just as expected, perhaps, or less than you expected before you signed up, or you were expecting something totally different, perhaps. It could be also that you don't have any clear opinion about it. So please take a few seconds to vote, and then we'll just have to say goodbye to you. Thank you very much. And hopefully this webinar has helped you to understand, as I said at the beginning, how important your role is. By the way, before we close, I can reveal that 75% of you voted yes, this was exactly what we were expecting, and even 19% of you were positively surprised, because this was apparently more than you expected. So thank you very much again, and talk to you soon, hopefully. Bye for now.